Dear God.
And grind, and step, and whoa!
Everyone watched 2.5 men back then. Nobody knew what was really happening behind the cameras. Charlie Sheen was earning $1.9 million per episode. Jon Cryer was making about a third of that. Same show, same hours, massive gap. But the money was only the beginning. Jon recently broke his silence, music, about that set. The strange phone calls before everything collapsed. The Christmas Day, music, arrest. The slow unraveling nobody outside the studio understood. He stayed quiet for over 10 years. Now at last he has named what really happened. And the truth is uglier than fans imagined. Jon Cryer was born on April 16, 1965 in New York City. And from the very beginning, acting was already part of his world. He did not grow up looking at show business from far away. He grew music up inside it. His mother, Gretchen Cryer, was a writer, actress, and singer. And his father, David Cryer, was also an actor and singer. So for Jon, stage work, rehearsals, performance, and creative life were not strange or glamorous things that belonged to other people. They were normal. They were part of home. That matters because it explains how early the pull began. At just 4 years old, he appeared in his first commercial with his mother. And the experience went badly in a way that almost feels too dramatic to be true. Music, he got so excited that he broke out in hives and the production had to stop. Even then, there was already something, music, intense about his connection to performing. He was not just a child standing in front of a camera. He was a kid reacting with his whole body to the pressure of being music on set. It was an unusual beginning for someone who would go on to build a long career in film and television. By the time he was 12, he had already decided he wanted to become an actor. That is early for anyone, even in a family like his. His mother answered with a line that was funny, blunt, and probably very real. She told him plumbing was a pretty good career. In one sentence, music, she said everything. She knew acting was risky. She knew talent was not enough. She knew the business could be cruel. But Jon did not let go of the idea. He stayed with it. And that decision shaped everything that followed. From the way he trained to the way he handled school and the path he chose after graduation. As a teenager, he spent several summers at Stage Door Manor Performing Arts Training Center, which was not some casual summer hobby, but a serious place for young performers. At the same time, he was also getting a demanding academic education. He graduated from Bronx High School of Science in 1983, one of New York's toughest and most respected schools. That contrast makes his story more interesting because he was not drifting through life as some typical show business kid. He was moving through a highly competitive school environment while quietly building himself for the stage and screen. Around him were students chasing science, medicine, and other respected careers. Meanwhile, Jon was preparing for a future that was much harder to predict. Then came another big choice. Instead of going to college in the usual way, he went to London for a summer Shakespeare course at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. That decision said a lot about him. He was not picking comfort. He was not following the safe standard path. He was betting on craft. He was betting on the work itself. His mother reportedly saw this as a great disappointment, which only adds more tension to the story. Even at that age, he was already choosing the uncertain road and trusting that serious training would matter more than a normal college experience. Still, early ambition does not always turn into instant success. And Jon Cryer learned that quickly. His first years as an actor were not some smooth rise to stardom. He appeared in No Small Affair in 1984, then got wider attention in Pretty in Pink in 1986, and later, music, played Lenny Luthor in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace in 1987. On paper, that looks fast and, music, exciting. A young actor lands visible roles, gets noticed, and starts climbing. But the truth, music, was messier than that. He was moving into bigger projects, yes, but he was also still trying to prove what he really was. Was he a leading man, a quirky side character, or just someone the industry had not figured out yet? That confusion followed him earlier than most people realize. Before the movies really took off, Jon's first professional acting job was on Broadway, where he stepped into roles linked to Matthew Brick in plays like Torch Song Trilogy and Brighton Beach Memoirs. He was chosen partly because he closely resembled Brick, and that detail may sound helpful at first, but it carried a hidden cost. From the beginning, people were measuring him against someone else. They were not fully seeing Jon Cryer on his own terms. Even before Hollywood started making decisions about him, comparison had already become part of his story. Then his first film repeated the same problem. In No Small Affair, released in 1984, he played a teen photographer in a lead role at just 19 years old. It should have felt like a clean beginning, but once again, the role had been linked to Broderick. So, even his film debut came with that strange feeling that he was walking in someone else's shadow. He had the timing, the look, and the screen presence to become a young star. But the industry still seemed unsure about how to present him. Instead of feeling like a fresh leading man, he was drifting into that frustrating music space where people notice you but still do not fully commit to you. Then came Pretty in Pink in 1986, and for a moment it looked like everything was about to change. The film made Jon Cryer a teen icon, and his character, Ducky, became unforgettable. But even here, the story did not turn out the way many people expected. The original ending had Ducky ending up music with Andy. That was the emotional payoff. That was the dream. But test audiences rejected it. Viewers reportedly booed the ending, and John Hughes changed it so Andy chose Blaine instead. That one decision changed the emotional fate of Cryer's most beloved character. Ducky became the guy who lost at the last, music second. He became the one people loved but not the one who won. That twist says a lot about Jon Cryer's career in general, because again and again he got close to a breakthrough and then watched it slip just out of reach. After Pretty in Pink, the smooth rise never came. In 1987, music, he appeared in Hiding Out as a Wall Street broker on the run from the mafia. In the same year, he played Lenny Luthor in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Both roles sounded like strong follow-ups. Both looked like the kind of moves that should build momentum, music, but neither gave him the lift he needed. Superman 4, in particular, was hurt badly by a slashed budget, with reports, music, saying it dropped from around $32 million to $17 million, and the movie became a disaster. So instead of building on the energy of Pretty in Pink, Cryer got pulled into projects that looked bigger than they actually were. Then in 1989, he landed the lead in the famous Teddy Z. And once again, there was hope. The show got good reviews and even earned Emmy attention, which should have been a sign that better things were coming. But ratings were weak. CBS, Music, canceled it after just 15 episodes, and 5 episodes never even, Music, aired. That failure hurt more than most because it helped create a brutal industry label that followed him for years. People started calling him a show killer. It was not just that a project had failed. It was that his very presence started being treated like bad luck. That kind of label can poison a career, because after a while every new opportunity arrives already damaged by old fear, and that is what made the next stretch so hard. After Pretty in Pink made him look like a future star in 1986, Hollywood never really delivered on that promise. For roughly the next 15 years, Jon Cryer moved through guest television roles, small films, and projects that came and went with very little impact. He later said that at one point he went about 3 years with very little work at all. So, the actor people remembered from a beloved teen movie was now trying to survive in an industry that had started to treat him as a risk. He did not stop trying. In 1998, he wrote, music, produced, and starred and went to Coney Island on a mission from God. Be back by 5. This was not some casual side, music, project. It was personal. It was the move of someone trying to prove he still had real creative power after years of damage. Some critics respected the film, but it never broke into mainstream culture. That made the whole thing even more frustrating. He was working. He was taking risks. He, music, was trying to rebuild with something meaningful. Yet, the wider public still barely noticed. One of T. His strange turns in his career is that he had already crossed paths with Charlie Sheen years before their most famous partnership. In 1991, both actors appeared in Hot Shots, which at the time was just another comedy job. Nobody could have known then what that connection would later mean. But looking back, it feels like an early preview, music, of something bigger. Years later, when 2.5 Men came along, that shared history helped create a natural chemistry. The irony is almost unbelievable. Jon Cryer, who had spent years stuck in career limbo, would eventually become the steady, music, half of one of television's most chaotic duos. Before that comeback happened, though, the low point got even lower. During those wilderness years, Cryer worked as a house manager at a theater. And yes, part of the job included cleaning toilets. That detail hits hard because it strips away every illusion. This was not just an actor having a slow year. This was someone who had once been a recognizable face from Pretty in Pink doing backstage work that nobody connects, music, with Hollywood glamour. It shows just how far the fall had gone. But it also shows something stronger. Music, he did not disappear completely. He stayed close to the work. He stayed in the building even when, music, the spotlight was gone. In a strange way, that long slump gave him something useful. Music, it grounded him. He later reflected that being forgotten changed him emotionally, and that becomes important later in the story. By the time chaos exploded around him on 2.5 Men, Jon Cryer was not someone who still believed fame was stable or permanent. He had already lived through the opposite. He knew how quickly the industry could turn cold. So when another storm came, he was better prepared for it than people might assume. Then finally in September 2003, everything, music, changed. 2.5 Men arrived on CBS and completely reset his career. The role of Alan Harper fit him in a way that felt almost too perfect. Alan was broke, awkward, needy, divorced, and always, music, one step behind everyone else. He was funny, but not in a flashy way. He was funny because he felt painfully human. And Jon Cryer knew exactly how to play that. After years of being overlooked, he turned that overlooked energy into something unforgettable. That is why Alan Harper connected so strongly. Cryer did not treat the character like a cartoon. He played the embarrassment, the desperation, and the small humiliations in a way, music, that felt real. Audiences were not just laughing at Alan. They knew him. They had seen people like him. Maybe they had even been him. For an actor who had spent years being boxed in by music, old perceptions, this role changed everything. It turned weakness into comic power. It made him impossible to ignore. The comeback became official in the most public way possible. Jon Cryer won a Primetime Emmy in 2009 and another in 2012 for 2.5 Men. That mattered because it proved the success was, music, not just about being on a hit show. It meant critics and voters were finally recognizing him as a major television performer. Then in 2011, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. After such a long drought, those moments felt like more than awards. They felt like correction, like the story had finally swung back in his favor. And yet, even during the triumph, there were strange imbalances. One of the most shocking details from that era was the money gap between Cryer and Charlie Sheen. By 2011, Sheen was reportedly making around $1.9 million per 22-minute episode, making him one of the highest-paid actors on television. Cryer later said he was earning about a third of that, even though the show depended on both men. The irony was sharp. Sheen's chaos raised his value in contract talks, while Cryer's reliability gave him less leverage. It was a perfect example of how strange network television had become at its peak. At first, though, the set reportedly felt warm and cooperative. Cryer later said that Sheen had told everyone he was sober and committed to staying clean, and Cryer believed him. That belief matters because it makes what came later feel even heavier. In the beginning, the chemistry worked. the early seasons felt easy. It looked like the kind of hit that could roll on for years without much trouble. Music, but underneath that surface, cracks were already beginning to form. According to Cryer, small changes started appearing before the public meltdown ever happened. Sheen began questioning joke lines he had already approved. His energy felt different. He seemed less steady on set. Then by Christmas Day 2009, things had taken a dark turn. Charlie Sheen was arrested in Aspen, Colorado, music, after a domestic violence incident involving Brooke Miller. Cryer texted his support, and Sheen replied with a dark joke, calling it a bad day. Even that response seemed to hint at how unstable everything had become. Then things grew stranger. One of the most shocking stories Cryer later shared involved a bag that Sheen asked him to hide before Denise, music, Richards came to the set. Cryer expected something illegal. Instead, music, inside was a copy of barely legal and other porn material. It sounds absurd, but that detail matters because it showed how normalized strange behavior had become around Sheen. What should have been alarming was becoming routine. Around the same time, Cryer began realizing that Sheen's marriage was also in trouble. The off-screen chaos was growing and it was starting to affect the work. Music. By early 2011, the crisis could no longer be hidden. On January 27, Sheen was taken to a Los Angeles hospital after what reports described music as a 36-hour drug and alcohol binge and production shut down again. Then on February 24, CBS and Warner Brothers halted product. On for the rest of the season, saying his conduct and condition made it impossible to continue. Reports, music, said at least 200 staffers were affected by the shutdown. At that point, the story was no longer just about one actor spiraling. It had become a business disaster. A huge television machine had been thrown off course, music, by the collapse of its biggest star. What made this story hit so hard was that the unfairness was obvious, music, right from the start. Jon Cryer later said he was earning only about 1/3 of what Charlie Sheen was making on 2.5 Men. Even though both men were central to one of the biggest sitcoms on television at the time, music, Charlie's contract had climbed to around $1.9 million per episode, which made him the highest-paid actor on TV in 2011. Jon was on the same hit show, carrying the same machine forward every week. Yet, the money between them was nowhere close. That gap alone made the whole situation feel ugly. Still, the money was only one part of it. What made it stranger was the reason behind it. Charlie's personal life was falling apart, and somehow that chaos gave him more power, not less. Networks were desperate to keep the show alive because CBS had already pre-sold music 2 more seasons, and that meant losing Charlie would have blown up a massive music business. Jon later explained that Charlie's instability gave him leverage in a way that calm, steady professionalism never could. Charlie was the risk. So, the studio kept paying more to manage that risk. Jon, on the other hand, had a stable life, showed up, did the work, and had far less bargaining power because nobody feared losing him in the same explosive way. That is what made the whole music thing so bitter. The person creating the crisis had more value at the table than the person keeping everything together. And then March 7, 2011 changed everything. On that day, Warner Brothers fired Charlie Sheen from 2.5 Men effective immediately. The firing came after weeks of music, public chaos, rehab trouble, attacks on creator Chuck Lorre, and behavior that had pushed the set to the edge. By then, CBS had already canceled music, the final 4 episodes of the season, which showed just how badly things had spun out. For a star at the top of television to lose a giant network job like that in full public view was shocking. This was not a quiet contract dispute behind closed doors. It was a full collapse, and everyone could see it happening in real time. What should have ended there only got messier. Charlie did not walk away and disappear. Instead, he filed a $100 million lawsuit against Chuck Lorre and Warner Brothers. The case was later settled for $25 million, which was still a huge number, but far below what he had demanded. That gap mattered because it showed how far apart both sides really were. Charlie was not just angry about losing the job. He wanted a public fight, and he kept pushing long after the studio had cut ties. That turned a TV firing into something bigger and uglier. It no longer looked like a business split. It looked personal. Then came another public disaster. In April 2011, Charlie launched his live show, the Torpedo of Truth Tour, hoping maybe he could turn the chaos into a new kind of success. Instead, the opening night in Detroit became another symbol of how badly everything had broken down. Around 5,100 music people were there, but many started turning on him quickly. Some walked out before the 70-minute show was even over. Reports said people shouted for music refunds as the performance fell apart in front of them. Charlie also insulted people from the stage, which only made the whole thing uglier. Rather than repairing his image, the tour made the collapse feel even more real. Now it was not just happening in interviews or headlines. It was happening live in front of people who had paid to see him. And in the middle of all that, Jon Cryer got dragged into it too. Charlie began calling him a turncoat, a traitor, and a troll, even though Jon had not publicly attacked him after the firing. That made the whole thing feel even more uncomfortable because Jon had mostly stayed quiet. He was not out there trying to humiliate Charlie. He was not escalating the feud. Still, Charlie pulled him into the storm anyway. For fans, that was one of the strangest parts of the whole saga. A quiet co-star, someone who had shared the screen with him for years, suddenly became another target. That gave the fallout a more personal sting. It was not just Charlie against the studio anymore. It was Charlie burning through old connections, too. That is why Jon's later comments landed so hard when he eventually spoke about the pay gap. He was not just telling a strange salary story from Hollywood. He was exposing the way fear had shaped the whole system. Charlie's bad behavior had become a bargaining weapon. Executives were so afraid of losing him or losing control of the show that they kept throwing money at him. Jon later said it felt like people were just shoveling money at Charlie to keep the production moving. That detail said everything. The studio was not simply paying for talent. It was paying for peace. And once you see it that way, the pay gap becomes even harsher. Jon was the steady one, the reliable one. And somehow that counted for less. Even when Jon's own pay later rose to around $620,000 per episode, the gap was still huge. Charlie remained far ahead, and the message behind that difference was hard to ignore. In a business that likes to talk about professionalism, it looked like chaos had more market value than consistency. That is what made Jon's version of the story feel so sharp. He was not whining. He was pointing at something real. On a show built around both men, one of them became the giant payday while the other, despite being essential, stayed far behind. It felt unfair because it was unfair. Still, the money was only part of what broke between them. What made the relationship colder was what happened after Charlie was fired. Jon mostly stayed quiet in public. He did not rush out to defend Charlie, but he did not attack him either. He just stayed out of the noise. To most people, that might have seemed reasonable, but Charlie later saw that silence as betrayal. In his mind, Jon had not stood beside him when everything exploded. That mattered because these were not two strangers who had crossed paths for a season or two. They had spent 8 seasons together as TV brothers on one of the biggest shows in the country. So when that bond broke, it did not feel random. It felt like years of tension, frustration, and public chaos finally tearing it apart. By January 2025, Jon said it in the plainest way possible. Asked where things stood with Charlie, he answered, "I don't know. We don't have a relationship anymore." What made that line hit was how simple it was. There was no dramatic speech, no grand explanation, no fake softness to hide the truth. He did say he wished Charlie well, and he noted they still had mutual acquaintances, but the core message was clear. Whatever they once had was gone. By that point, the split was not a rumor or fan theory anymore. Jon had said it out loud himself. And when people started asking about a possible Two and a Half Men revival, Jon made his position even clearer. He pointed out that Charlie, music, had once been the highest-paid actor on television and still blew it all up. Then he said he would not want to go into business with him for any, music, length of time. That line was brutal because it was calm. Jon was not screaming. Music, he was not trying to humiliate Charlie. He was simply saying that whatever talent and history Charlie had, the trust was not there anymore. Fans may dream about reunions, but Jon's words made it clear that nostalgia was not enough. Too much had happened. What makes the story even sadder is that Charlie did try, at least in music, some limited way, to soften things. After hearing Jon's comments in the 2025 music Netflix documentary aka Charlie Sheen, Charlie sent him a message thanking him for his contribution and saying he was sorry they had not connected personally. He even said he, music, hoped to see Jon around the campus. On the surface, it sounded polite and thoughtful, but it was still only a message. It was not a real conversation. It was not the kind of moment that fixes years of hurt. And by April 2026, Charlie was still admitting that he had not actually spoken to Jon face-to-face since the documentary. He even said that every time the issue came up, he told himself he was going to reach out and then never did. So even the apology became part of the distance. Nice words were there, but the real repair never happened. That is why the updates from late April and early May 2026 felt calmer but not happier. Charlie called Jon lovely and very talented, which showed there was less rage in his tone than before. Jon around the same time also sounded less explosive than the old days. But neither update changed the truth. They were still not friends again. The wound was quieter now, but it was still open. And in a way, that is what makes the story more painful. A screaming feud can at least feel alive. This felt different. It felt like a long silence that had settled in and stayed. Jon's most powerful comments about Charlie did not come from anger. They came from how clearly he described, music, the collapse. In the 2025 documentary, Jon said Charlie was unraveling in every conceivable way. That line stayed with people because it did not reduce the situation to one headline or one scandal. It made the whole thing sound deeper, music, and darker. Jon was not just describing a difficult co-star or a messy celebrity. He was describing someone losing control of himself in public piece by piece while millions watched. And Jon pushed that idea even further with one of the sharpest things he ever said about Charlie. He described him as a guy who does not believe he deserves the things he has. It is a simple sentence, but it cuts deep. It suggests that the chaos was not just about ego or drugs or bad choices in isolation. It suggests something more self-destructive underneath it all. Not just a man misbehaving, but a man wrecking what he had because some part of him could not hold on to it. What made that moment even more striking was Charlie's response. He later said Jon had nailed it. He called the comments, music, dead on. In a feud this public, that kind of reaction was surprisingly emotional. It showed, music, that Jon's words had reached something real. That is also why Jay's view of the public reaction mattered so much. He said one of the hardest parts was watching people enjoy Charlie's breakdown. That changes the whole shape of the story. It stops being just another Hollywood scandal and starts looking darker. A giant sitcom, one of the biggest money, music, machines on television, slowly turned into public entertainment for all the wrong reasons. And one of its stars had to stand there and watch the other fall apart while the audience treated it like a show of its own. That gave the entire saga a cruel edge. By then, the fallout had stretched, music, across years. Charlie's exit in 2011 ended 8 seasons of Two and music, a Half Men. After that, Ashton Kutcher came in and the series continued for 4 more seasons before ending in 2015. But the emotional part of the story, music, never wrapped up so neatly. Even in 2026, Charlie was still joking about Jon being a little grudgy a decade and a half later, which showed that, music, the distance between them had not really closed. Time had passed. The headlines had cooled, but the break still felt real. And maybe that is the most striking part of all. Jon never framed the whole thing as simple anger. By May 2026, he spoke about the relationship more like something he grieved than something he wanted to fight over. He made it clear that trust broken in public does not come back through one apology or one careful message. At the same time, he still wished Charlie health and a good life. That made the story feel sadder than a normal feud. It was not two men loudly attacking each other anymore. It was one man looking at the wreckage, music, of a bond and admitting that some damage does not fully reverse.